All right, here we go. Last section, the age of Napoleon, rise, defeat, outcome. So understand the rise of Napoleon and why the French people strongly support him, how Napoleon beat an empire and the challenges that that empire created, events that led to his downfall, and then how the Congress of Vienna tried to create lasting peace. So when we look at Napoleon, he rises up through the military. First of all, he's not French. He's from Corsica. He doesn't come from a very wealthy family. And really, it's because of his talents and abilities that help him rise through the ranks. And so that's going to be important when you look at why does he believe in the ideals of the revolution? Because of equality of opportunity, he got the chance to move up through the military. Under the old system, he would have never had a prayer of leading an army because he wasn't rich enough and he didn't come from the right family and he didn't know the right people. And so he really believes in these ideals of the revolution. Now, on the flip side of that, he does not like the craziness and the chaos and some of the extreme social issue stances that the revolution takes. But when he looks at where does he go in terms of supporting the revolution or not supporting the revolution, he believes it's better to eat than to be eaten. So in other words, it's better to be on the winning side than to be destroyed fighting for a cause on the losing side maybe. So the other thing about his rise to power is he's very good at managing his messages. So in other words, news of his defeats don't get back to France, but all of his victories do. And early on, he goes through a string of victories, and that gets him catapulted to fame pretty quickly. And so for a guy who's really just beginning at the beginning of the French Revolution, he moves into politics and is able to get himself named consul for life by 1802. So this is a pretty quick rise through the ranks. And eventually, he's able to get himself crowned as Emperor of France. He invites the Pope. When the Pope's going to put the crown on his head, he takes the crown and places it on his own head to kind of symbolize that he alone is responsible for his rise. Now, the other thing is he's pretty smart at politics. So he holds these plebiscites. He asks the French people, hey, do you want me to be your emperor? And when they overwhelmingly say yes, he can say, well, I got elected emperor. He didn't take the title of emperor. The people approved it. And he has these plebiscites throughout to give people the sense that they have a say, even though they probably really don't. Why is he so well liked in France? Because he's moving from chaos to order. He's moving from the reign of terror to security. He's moving from government corruption to efficiency. And so he's bringing some semblance of peace and stability, and he's letting the French people take a deep breath and say everything's going to be okay. He focuses on economic prosperity. What changes can I make to make sure that people have their daily needs met? So he sets price controls on bread, for example. The other thing is he steps back and moves away from these controversial social issues. So for example, with religion, he makes peace with the French Catholic Church, and that is going to end probably unnecessary controversy. And because of that, he's extremely popular, has wide support. The Napoleonic Code, he takes a lot of these things that were done by the French Revolution, he establishes them into the code of law. Most importantly, equality before the law, religious toleration, ends all of the old systems that people hated. Now, on the flip side, women who had gained some rights throughout the French Revolution are going to lose many of those rights, but it's kind of important for down the road. When we look at how Napoleon builds an empire, he does it through a number of ways. Sometimes he just plain annexes it or takes it. Sometimes what he's able to do is negotiate treaties where France is going to promise to protect these places, and that essentially kind of allows France to control them. Also through diplomacy. So for example, with Spain, he kicks the king of Spain out, and Napoleon puts his brother on the throne. So now he has an ally in Spain. And also on top of that, he has a number of alliances, especially with Russia is probably the most important one, where they are going to work together. The only thing that's really kind of sitting outside of his control is Great Britain. He's going to invade Great Britain, but then the French army suffers a huge defeat, thanks in part to the British Navy. And so, because of that defeat, Napoleon can no longer afford to invade Great Britain. So he comes up with another plan that he calls the Continental System. It's essentially going to be an economic trade war. He's going to try and prevent anybody from trading with the United Kingdom. It fails for a whole bunch of reasons, but mostly because it's really difficult to block off all trade, especially to an island nation. The other thing is it's extremely hard to win a trade war because what happens is there's always retribution. So food prices all throughout Europe go up because of this trade war. So the people of Europe are suffering because Napoleon wants to get back at Great Britain. Now, the whole thing with Napoleon and the French Revolution is this nationalism and this pride of the revolutionary ideals is going to spread outwards to other places. And so that nationalism is going to backfire against Napoleon because these countries that he has invaded, that he is dominating, that he has taken over, that he's controlling, more and more people view the French as foreign oppressors that need to be driven out of their countries. So now Napoleon has to fight these battles all throughout his empire as these people are trying to revolt and rebel and push the French out. And so he's nonstop having to put these fires out all throughout Europe. Because of all of this and because of the failure of the Continental System, the Tsar decides the Tsar of Russia is no longer going to support the Continental System. And Napoleon is going to go and punish him for doing that. So Napoleon assembles 600,000 troops, and they are going to march into Russia and punish the Tsar for doing this. The Russians, knowing that they can't fight against the French, decide to use a scorched earth. They burn and destroy everything. They destroy crops. They slaughter livestock. They destroy villages. Anything that could possibly be used by the French, the Russians destroy themselves. And they lead him 1,000 miles into the heart of Russia. And at that time, winter is going to start setting in, and Napoleon realizes I'm 1,000 miles into Russia. They've destroyed everything that it could possibly use to help feed and supply my army throughout the winter, and he starts a retreat. And during this retreat, that 600,000 troops ends up being fewer than 20,000 by the time they get back. So this is a perfect opportunity for Russia, Great Britain, Austria, and Prussia to defeat Napoleon. So they come together, they defeat him, they send him to the island of Elba. They put Louis the 18th on the throne of France. The problem is, pretty quickly, Louis begins to enact some of these changes that make people of France believe that we're going to go back to the old system of the three estates. And that really freaks people out. Plus, there's still all kinds of economic problems with debt and food all throughout France. And so the people of France beg Napoleon to come back, which he does, but really quickly that four alliance reassembles and they defeat him at the Battle of Waterloo, which is why today, every once in a while, you'll hear people refer to an event in a person's life as being their Waterloo, meaning it was the defeat from which they couldn't come back from. Well, if we look at his legacy, France and many of their territories and colonies, so for example, Louisiana, all have the Napoleonic Code. You also see more and more people being able to vote in the French Republic, and that's going to spread outwards to other places. For example, the United States is going to expand suffrage, maybe not directly because of this, but because of the ideals that are beginning here. Across the world, you see more nationalistic feelings. It's going to lead to a lot of the revolutions in Latin America. And the United States are able to pick up the Louisiana territory because Napoleon has to sell it for cash, quick cash. Congress of Vienna. Here's the problem. Napoleon totally tore up all of old Europe, so they have to rebuild it. The best leaders from these places show up to Vienna to figure out what to do about it. By far, the most important leader there is Metternich. He has a vision for what Europe should look like. What is their main goal? is to create a lasting peace. The way they're going to do that is through a balance of power. They're going to make sure that the big countries in Europe are all equal to each other, so no one country thinks that they can push the others around and then begin to do what Napoleon did. The key to this, according to Metternich, is to protect the monarchs. So bring back, that's what that legitimacy is. Bring back these monarchs, the legitimate rulers of these countries, and place them back on their thrones. And so you see what Europe looked like in 1810 under the French Empire and what it looks like 1817 after the Congress of Vienna. Now it's also important that a lot of these leaders are kind of pursuing their own goals and working counter to each other. They're not fully invested in a unified Europe, but they do want lasting peace. The problem with the Congress of Vienna is that they want to turn back the clock of time, and you just can't do that. They failed to fully appreciate the rising tide of nationalism. Now, on the flip side of that, this quadruple alliance is going to make sure that they work together to put down any kind of problems. They're going to meet periodically at the Concert of Europe to talk through their problems. They do establish the century of peace, which is almost unheard of for Europe. But because they didn't appreciate this new force of nationalism, what they do is, in a lot of ways, going to lead almost directly to World War I. Because the leaders at the turn of the century, the late 1900s, early 1900s, aren't nearly as talented as this group of individuals who worked to create this peace, and so they're not going to be able to avoid war like the generations before